Peeps by Scott Westerfeld. Chapter 9, Section 2. It's possible that this excavation has opened the lower environs, the shrink said, allowing something old to bubble up. You think they uncovered a reservoir? Neither of them said anything. Remember what I said about rats carrying the disease? How broods store the parasite in their blood when their peeps die? Those broods can last a long time after the peeps are gone, spreading the disease down generations of rats. Old cities carry the parasite in their bones, the way chickenpox can live in your spinal column for decades, ready to pop out as horrible blisters in old age. The health club, huh? I said, shaking my head. That's what people get for working out. It may be more than a reservoir, Cal. There may be larger things than rats and peeps to worry about. The shrink paused. And then there are the owners. The owners? I asked. The man from records glanced at the shrink, and the shrink looked at me. A first family, she said. Oh, crap, I answered. One thing about the carriers of the night watch, they have a special affection for the families after whom the oldest streets are named. Back in the 1600s, New Amsterdam was a small town, only a few thousand people, and everyone was someone's cousin or uncle or indentured servant. Certain loyalties go back a long way, and in blood. Who are they? Bowruns? Stewies? The shrink's eyes slitted as she spoke, one hand gesturing vaguely toward the half-forgotten world outside her townhouse. If I remember correctly, Joseph once lived on this very street, and Aaron built his first home on Golden Hill, where Gold Street and Fulton now meet. Medcalf Ryder's farm was up north a ways. He grew wheat in a field off Verdant Lane, although that field is called Times Square these days. And they had more farmland in Brooklyn. They were good boys, the Ryders, and the nightmare has kept up with their descendants, I believe. I found my voice. Ryder, you say? With a Y. With a Y, the records guy offered softly. I swallowed. My progenitor's name is Morgan Ryder. Oh, then we have a problem, said the shrink. The guy from records, whose name was Chip, took me down to his cubicle. We were going over the history of the Hoboken Path Tunnel, which was a lot more exciting than you'd think. The first incident was in 1880. Killed 20 workers, Chip said. Then another in 1882 killed a few more than that. They were supposedly explosions, and the company had the body parts to prove it. Handy, I said. And leggy, he chuckled out from under the soulless eyes of the shrink's dog collection. Chip was a certified laugh riot. That brought the project to a halt for a couple of decades. Those incidents were in Jersey, but on this side of the river, we never bought the cover story. Why not? There are ancient tunnels that travel through the bedrock all around these parts. And around the path train, the tunnels are newer. His fingers drifted along the tunnel blueprints on his desk. Check it out, Cal. If you add up the weight of all the plants and animals that live under the ground, it's actually more than everything that lives above. About 1 billion organisms in every pinch of soil. Yeah, none of which is big enough to eat 20 people. He lowered his voice. But that's what happens after you're buried, kid. Things in the ground eat you. Great. Now Records was calling me kid. Okay, Chip, I said, but worms don't eat people who are still alive. But there's a food chain down there, he said. Something has to be at the top. You guys don't have a clue, do you? Chip shook his head. We have clues. Those tunnels, they're a lot like the trails of an earthworm through the dirt. I frowned and dropped my eyes back to the blueprints for Lace's building. The fine-lined drawings, precisely scaled and covered in tiny symbols, showed only the shapes that human machines had carved from the soil. No hint at the environment surrounding our descent into the earth. So, you think there are giant worms down there? I thought you guys in Records were a little more factual. Yeah, well, we read a lot of weird stuff. He pointed his pen at the edge of the level labeled Health Club, lower. This is what somebody should have noticed, and then filed the great big ST57. The pen tapped. The excavation goes too deep for comfort. It's only a few yards above a part of the exhaust system for the path tunnel. Any variation from these plans, and they're connected. Connected to what? You ever see those big exhaust towers by the river? The fans are about 80 feet across, sucking air all day. Bad. Air is bad? They're pumping oxygen down there. Chip shook his head, tossed the pen disgustedly down onto the plans. That's like pouring fertilizer on your weeds. Lack of oxygen is the growth limiting factor in the subterranean biome. So things are growing. But those explosions in Jersey were 120 years ago, after all. We're just talking rats these days, right? Probably, Chip said. Probably. Wonderful. Standing there in the gloom, I realized that Chip and I were underground right now. Tons of bricks and mortar piled up over our heads. The squeaking ceiling fan labored to bring oxygen down to us. Without the flickering fluorescence, it would be too dark even for my peep eyes to see. Down here was hostile territory, a place for corpses and worms and the bigger things that ate the worms and the bigger things that ate them. But our guys at the Path say there are a few places under the exhaust towers that their workers have abandoned, Chip added. They aren't officially condemned, but nobody goes down there anymore. Great. And how close is that to Morgan's building? Not far. A couple 100 yards? My nose wrinkled, as if a bad smell had wafted into the cubicle. Why couldn't I have just lost my virginity the normal way? No vampiric infections, no subterranean menaces. Okay, so what's the best way for me to get down there? Through the front door. Chip ran a finger across the building plans, pointing out a set of symbols. They've got major security all over the joint, cameras everywhere, especially in the lower levels. Crap. I thought you had an inside line? That girl you mentioned in your 1158S? The one who lives there now? Tell her you want to check out the basement. She had an attitude problem. I'd rather break in. I'm good with locks. Chip raised an eyebrow. Or a sanitation badge? I flailed. Maybe a health inspector of health clubs? What happened between you and her? Nothing. You can tell me, kid. I groaned, but Chip fixed me with his big brown eyes. Look, it's just that we had this My voice fell. There was a superhuman revelation incident, sort of. There was? Chip frowned. Have you filed an SRI 2745? No, I haven't filed an SRI 2745. It's not like she saw me climbing up a wall or anything. All I did was sort of lift her up, and only for a second. And? And swing her from one balcony to another. Otherwise, we were going to get caught for breaking and entering. Just entering. I mean, nothing was broken. I decided not to get into the grand theft blender issue. Look, Chip, all I need are some traps and pest control badge. Catch a few rats. Let the doctor test their blood, see if we've got a running reservoir. First things first. No big deal. Chip nodded slowly, then looked down and continued detailing the lower depths of the Hoboken path tunnel, letting his expression say it all.